Hi, this is Donald here, and this is my review of The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. To introduce this book was written in 1949 by Joseph Campbell. It's a classic, like a really classic book on mythology and its interactions to itself and the human experience. Kind of a book about how mythology transcends individual cultures, but reflects humanity itself, kind of, something like that. Joseph Campbell was an academic who focused on medieval literature as well as mythology, and he had a lot of education. This book is written in two parts. Part one is the adventure of the hero, or the cycle of the hero's adventure, you might be familiar with. Part two is called the Cosmogonic Cycle. In other words, creation myths. Now, I want to talk about the physical copy of this book. This is a nice physical copy, nothing incredible, but I think it fits most of the criteria pretty well for a good book to me. It's a nice size, it has decent paper, the font is nice even if it's a little busy. I will say the pictures are black and white, and I wish they were of higher quality. But overall, it was a nice book, and maybe the pictures being black and white is just a relic from its original publication date of 1949. What did I think about this book? I'm not exactly sure I knew what to expect reading this book, other than it was going to be about the hero's journey. But when I read this book, it was not what I expected. It's a little hard for me to explain, but this book was academic. It was dense. It was hard to read. I would say it would take multiple read-throughs to really understand what the author is trying to tell you. It's dense, it's challenging, it's long, it's complicated. The sentences are hard. This is not an easy book to read. This is kind of like a college education, a tough book to read. The structure of the book as well is hard to read. There's a lot of good stuff in here. It makes you think, but it's just so hard to read. And I've read plenty of challenging things to read, but it doesn't excuse that the material itself is hard to read, which is a shame because I was pretty excited to read this book, but it was challenging for me to keep reading it and read through to the end. Usually if a book is too hard to read and I just can't stomach it, I just put it away and get to something else. But I decided to stick through it for this book. Let me give you some concrete examples of why this book is hard to read. And I've said it a bunch, but I think this is something that really needs to be pointed out. Otherwise, you might start reading this book and really get slammed. Let me give you an example that's related to structure. Part 2 is called the Cosmogonic Cycle. First of all, I think 99.999% of Americans or English speakers would have no idea what cosmogonic cycle means. And when the author switched to part 2, I was kind of confused because I thought this book was about the hero's adventure, not about origin stories, creation stories. After finishing this book, I'm still a little confused why it was mentioned. A lot of the flow of the ideas is also hard. It's almost kind of random. For example, you have part 2, the Cosmogonic Cycle. And within that, there are 5 chapters called Emanations, the Virgin Birth, Transformations of the Hero, and Disillusions. And within those, you have all these different scenarios. It's just too much to follow without a really strong opening that explains everything. And I didn't feel like there was one that could really draw me in and ground me. Now let me show you an example about reading this book. I'm just going to flip to a random page here. Here's a sentence. Therein, divinity is pleased to reward its own glory, and this pleasure is itself inducement to the act of manifestation or creation. Another sentence. The tree is the world axis in its wish-fulfilling, fruitful aspect, the same as that displayed in Christian homes at the season of the winter solstice, which is the moment of the rebirth or return of the sun, a joyous custom inherited from the Germanic paganism that is given to the modern German language its feminine, Sonne. That sentence was long. That was a 3-line sentence there. And this book is filled with sentences like that. Sometimes it can be pretty simple. A lot of times it's not very simple. Unfortunately, because of some of this complexity and confusion, the main points of the author started to become a little bit felt weaker to me, because it was hard for me to follow along. And sometimes he would give an example and I would kind of be doubtful if it actually applied. Ultimately, you're trying to convince me or enlighten me as to the hero's adventure, the name of the book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. But sometimes if your ideas kind of seem random, I don't understand how it fits into your narrative. And unfortunately, I had that experience a couple times in this book. There's so many ideas in this book that sometimes it just seems like, cool, that's a story. You can interpret it 30 different ways, and you interpreted all these stories to fit what you want to believe, right? And I'm sure he's well researched, but the way he presented his ideas sometimes felt like that to me. Would I recommend this book? I would recommend this book, but with some pretty significant caveats. I think if you're more interested in a casual reading about the hero's adventure and journey, I'm 100% certain there are better books out there than this. This is way too challenging and deep and complicated and hard to get into. You're just going to suffer reading this thing. However, if you're more serious about the topic and you want a good kind of a classical reference that also goes deep, this book is awesome. Perfect for you. This book is definitely a book that'll require work. And if you're not willing to work, or if you're not in the mood to work at this book, it's not going to be a book for you. We'll just say that. Nothing wrong with reading for pleasure. I'm just saying this book is work. And that is my review of The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. Hope you enjoyed the review. Let me know what you think below. Thanks.